This presentation is on scientific misconduct, addressing questionable research practices. Our presenters are Laura Rodriguez, a doctoral student here at NAU, Joseph Aruguete, a doctoral student also here at NAU, Dr. Kim Callis, psychologist and assistant clinical professor at NAU, and Dr. Robert Horn, associate professor and chair of the educational psychology department. Our presentation is divided into different sections: an introduction and an overview, types of scientific misconduct and contributing factors, scientific misconduct contrasted with questionable research practices, a toxic climate, the history of publish or perish, and wrapping it up with heading off scientific misconduct in the classroom. We will start with an introduction and overview of our presentation. In order to discuss scientific misconduct, one must first define this construct and identify its many forms. Most professionals agree that misconduct is a process that breaches the standard code of conduct and ethical behavior and compromises the integrity in the reporting of professional scientific research. In a review of the research, it appears that plagiarism is the most familiar form of scientific misconduct. Other types of misconduct may include misappropriation of ideas, impropriety of authorship, falsification of data, and violation of generally accepted research practices, manipulation of experiments to generate preferred results, as well as other actions. Our presenters will explore factors that may compel researchers to engage in scientific misconduct. As mentioned, a publish or perish climate is prevalent in this moment in time, but are there other motivators? Financial gains or avoidance of financial losses, esteem, or simply ambition may likely induce researchers to engage in fraudulent practices. It is important to explore the underlying rationale for deceptive behavior that could have extremely serious repercussions. Where and how do we head off scientific misconduct? Our presenters discuss approaches in the education of research to inform researchers early in the ethical approaches. Finally, in researching this topic, our presenters found a wealth of information in the literature review regarding misconduct in biomedical research, but minimal information in the psychological sciences. One possible reason may be that fraud in biomedical research can be far more damaging to the population in the realm of psychology. Our presenters aim to address this discrepancy in the literature. Next, Dr. Kim Callis will present on the types of scientific misconduct and contributing factors.
Thank you, Dr. Horn. As we all know, there are a multitude of types of research misconduct, but for the sake of brevity, I'm only going to be touching on the following types: plagiarism, misappropriation of ideas, impropriety of authorship, falsification of data, and violation of generally accepted research practices. I would like to make a quick point here that my co-presenter Lotta is also going to be talking about in a bit, which is that research misconduct does not include honest error. The key distinction between misconduct and fraud and honest error is intent. For example, forgetting to report a value is an honest error, while deliberately not reporting a value is fraud. According to the U.S. federal policy on research misconduct, plagiarism is the appropriation of another person's ideas, processes, results, or words without giving appropriate credit. The notions of appropriation and credit are central here, as plagiarism is the appropriation of another person's material without giving proper credit. Is this plagiarism? I use someone else's work and lie about it afterwards. Of course it is. What if I use someone else's work, but when I'm confronted, I admit I got the information from a research article? Yeah, that would make me less of a jerk, but that's still plagiarism. What if I use Joseph's work, but pass it off as Lotta's work? That's a different kind of misconduct, but that is not plagiarism. What if I submit a manuscript and use 20% of my own text in a previously published article and I don't cite my own work? That's a little trickier. Can you recycle your own work, and is that plagiarism? There's some variation on the answers you might get. Some people believe that there's no such thing as self-plagiarizing. Some people believe restating 25 to 30% of your previous work is okay, but most academic journals have standards between 0 and 10% for acceptability of self-plagiarism. Typically, you cannot copy verbatim from any paper, including your own. However, you can refer to previous work, but you must explain it in a different language. That doesn't mean you break into German or something, but many times you present an extended version of your previous work, which is acceptable, yet you must clearly state this fact in the article or presentation, and you must be able to identify the major differences between the previous and the current work. Next, we're going to talk about misappropriation of ideas. This is simply means taking one's idea and using it as your own. This is incredibly hard to prove. Some might be disinclined to accept that ideas can be plagiarized. Some think that ideas are not intellectual property of anyone, except probably the people with the really good ideas. Still, you are plagiarizing if you use someone else's idea while implying that it is your own. There lies this difficulty relating to both identifying the plagiarism and making a conclusive case for idea plagiarism to have taken place. There's no computer program to discern this, nor is it easily proven that an idea was not independently arrived at. The psychologist Dan Gilbert calls this kleptomnesia, generating an idea that you believe is original, but in fact was generated by someone else. It's accidental plagiarism. Interestingly, other psychologists, starting with Alan Brown and Dana Murphy, have called this by another name, cryptomeria. This phenomena happens due to a logical but rather unusual feature of how human memory is wired. When we encode information, we tend to pay way more attention to the content than to the source. I don't know how many of you have siblings out there, but I, for one, will frequently give my mother a suggestion or offer some advice. And a couple of days later, she'll call me up and say, your sister just had the best idea. So she got the content, but she didn't get the source. Once we accept a piece of information as true or relevant, we no longer worry about where we acquired it. No matter what name you use to combat it, psychologists recommend reducing distractions and cutting down on multitasking, which of course is easier said than done. For example, in one article I read about a comedy writer who avoided watching other comedy shows for fear that they would inadvertently steal a joke. Next, I'm going to talk about the impropriety of authorship. Authorship credit should reflect the individual's contribution to a study. An author is considered anyone involved in the initial research design, data collection and analysis, manuscript drafting, or final approval. However, the following do not necessarily qualify for authorship: providing funding or resources, mentorship, or contributing research but not helping with the publication itself. The primary author assumes responsibility for the publication, making sure that the data are accurate, that all deserving authors have been credited, that all authors have given their approval for the final draft, and then handles responses to inquiries after the manuscript is published. Tips in negotiating authorship: recognize that authorship can change throughout a project. For example, authors should be added if a project has expanded beyond the original scope, or if the added author can contribute knowledge or expertise that is required by the project. On the other hand, a contributor may be removed as an author if the individual did not assist the project as initially agreed on, or if a contributor relocated or graduated and was subsequently unable to actively participate in the research. Moreover, authorship order may be revised if the individual's actual contributions differ significantly from those expected at the beginning of the project. The situation could occur if an author accepts increased responsibility or delegates some of the responsibility to other authors. Therefore, it is recommended that conversations regarding authorship be revisited throughout the project, but especially at major milestones. Open and fluid communication in this process is key to developing a respectful and professional research environment. The APA has some great tools on this link on the bottom of this slide, and Dr. Horn is going to refer to this later, but this tool is especially beneficial for graduate students. It involves checklists and scorecards for who did what on a project and how much time or effort was put into a project. Next is fabrication and falsification of data. Fabrication of data involves totally inventing a data set, whereas falsification refers to the manipulation of equipment or changing data such that research is not accurately represented in the research report. Sources of error can be placed on a continuum, as we've talked about, ranging from honest errors that can occur even with the best intentions at one end of the continuum, and then deliberate data fraud at the other end. And then things like misunderstandings or sloppiness or biases lie somewhere in between. True numbers of data fraud are difficult to estimate for several reasons. First, those of us, well, not us, but those that have committed data fraud are not likely to come forward and admit they've done such a thing, even with anonymous surveys. There have been numerous attempts over the years to assess the prevalence or incidence of misconduct via surveys, audits, and other methods with conflicting results and conclusions. Audits are usually conducted only once there is sufficient reason to suspect fraud. Furthermore, audits are less likely to be effective in the case of non-clinical psychological research because participants in psychological experiments are mostly anonymous and untraceable, and once the experiment has been concluded, they are difficult, if not impossible, to track down. And almost all of the assessments focused on medical research because the ramifications of psychological data are not as severe as, say, medical research, whereas the consequences impact funding sources, not to mention most psychological studies do not put lives at risk. Further, in psychological research, there's always a horde of potential causes for the failure to replicate a particular research finding. Therefore, even repeated failures to replicate do not indicate that fraud has occurred. However, consistent failure to replicate multiple findings of a particular researcher should be seen as a warning signal. Nonetheless, replications rarely play a decisive role in uncovering cases of fraud. So who does this hurt and how? There are 4 impacts of research fraud. First of all, it can damage the careers of students and colleagues who co-authored articles and that were unknowingly based on fraudulent research. Second, in the case of clinical research, patients can suffer because misinformation about the efficacy of treatment options. For example, Wakefield and 12 co-authors had an article published in 1999 that linked the vaccine against measles, mumps, and rubella to autism, which resulted in a substantial drop in vaccinations, which then may have caused multiple deaths among unprotected children. Third, fraud can delay scientific progress because researchers waste time and resources by trying to follow leads suggested by fraudulent research. Finally, fraud damages the image of the field in which the fraud was committed and reduces trust in science in general. We're kind of seeing that now with people ignoring the CDC guidelines in the midst of this COVID pandemic. Next is the violation of generally accepted research practices, and these can include serious deviation from accepted practices in proposing or carrying out research. Examples may encompass abuse of confidentiality, not observing regulations governing research, for example, IRBs, improper manipulation of experiments to obtain biased results, like stopping the collection of data because the results you were looking for were found, failure to report all of a study's dependent measures, or a lack of declaration of competing interests and of funding sponsorship, and other failures of transparency. Why do these things happen? As mentioned before, a lot of times this is unintentional. It's honest error. And the honest error seems to arise from inadequate training, a decline of standards of mentoring, and institutional failures of oversight. But when error rises to the level of intentional misconduct, why in the world do people jeopardize their career? Well, there's little evidence of monetary gains. There are a few exceptions, especially in biomedicine, but it appears that ambition may be the main motive. For some journals, especially the top ones, the data has to fit the hypothesis for an article to be accepted. It is possible that researchers may start out by slightly altering their data to make them statistically significant or to make them fit their hypothesis even better. Then as time goes on, once they score early successes and become known as a promising researcher, they feel that they must keep on publishing at a high rate in top journals to meet these high expectations. Another reason might be laziness. This points to a factor raised by Goodstein in 2010, where these fraudulent researchers often thought that they already knew the answers to the research problem that they were considering, and therefore they felt no need to do actual research to find the answer. Then, of course, there are just deviant people out there that lack integrity. We have no exact information about the prevalence of fraud in science and even the number of fraud cases that are uncovered every year. Even though many articles are peer-reviewed, fraud detection is not a primary aim of peer review. That's all I have for you, so I'm going to pass the virtual baton to my co-presenter, Laura Rodriguez.
Thank you, Dr. Callis. For my presentation, I will discuss scientific misconduct a bit further and contrast it with questionable research practices. Psychology is a research discipline that enhances our understanding of the world around us. It informs our work with clients and helps to address some of the more pervasive social dilemmas we encounter. Research in psychology is also collaborative and evident in other disciplines, such as law, medicine, and even environmental sustainability. Considering how impactful our research is to the larger community, I think this serves as a gentle reminder of the importance of conducting and presenting research findings in a way that aligns with our ethical standards and ensures public safety. Looking at our APA Code of Ethics, Section 8 in Research and Publication, I wanted to highlight some of the subsections that address scientific conduct. Examples include not fabricating data, not engaging in plagiarism, and taking appropriate credit for one's actual work. As easy as these seem to follow, I'll share a bit of some horror stories of prominent researchers engaging in research misconduct, particularly with fabricating data. These are a few other subsections that also include data publication and sharing of information, emphasizing the need for transparency. These practices promote collaboration and credibility in the field and increases authenticity. Going back to what Dr. Callis had mentioned earlier, here I think you may see issues like self-plagiarism, duplicating publications, and issues with reproducibility. Now I'm going to talk about scientific misconduct. Scientific misconduct is broadly defined as fabrication, falsification of data, and plagiarism. These involve more of the overt and flagrant acts where the individual is intentionally engaging in such bad scientific behaviors for whatever motive that might be. The key here is that it's intentional. They typically are divided between random and unrandom reasons for error. However, I think it's important to highlight that some of the random errors, such as laziness and disorganization, may be just as concerning as if it were more intentional, like falsification and engagement in unethical or legal issues. In this case, it reflects a much larger issue at hand, but it still creates cause for concern in the researcher engaging in such acts. Looking at the history of scientific misconduct, we know that this has been a significant issue for decades. However, it wasn't until Charles Babbage who formally presented a discussion of the prevalence of scientific misconduct. At that time, I think he defined it as hoaxes in human research, and he provided examples of how some researchers were gluing skeletal remains with animal remains and passing it as something different. It wasn't until the 1980s that the US government and Department of Health and Human Services got involved due to some of the high-profile scandals that were being reported because of funding and publishing issues amongst prominent researchers. The Office of Integrity was developed in the 90s to hold people accountable for their misbehaviors. So one of the researchers that I wanted to point out was Diederik Stapel. He is a social psychologist that was notorious for having fabricated entire data sets for over the course of 2 decades. When he was eventually discovered in 2011, 58 of his journal articles were retracted and struck from scientific record. And what I think this speaks to is the fact that it's not only affecting him, it also affected his mentors, colleagues, and also students that cited his material or worked under him. Eric Pullman is another major scandal of misconduct that I wanted to highlight. He published 10 reports containing fabricated patients and data to support his claims. I believe he was researching menopausal women. He defrauded government of over 2.9 million in grants and became the first US scientist jailed for scientific fraud. These cases continue to occur today. For instance, I looked at the Office of Research Integrity 2020 case summary website and found numerous cases of reckless behavior, citing falsification of data, publishing false or misleading information, and fabricating data. Given the highly publicized incidences of research misconduct, there's been a growing interest in examining questionable research practices. Unlike scientific misconduct that are more flagrant or overt, questionable research practices, or QRPs, are less flagrant, more subtle, and they tend to fall in the gray area of what's permissible and not. Some of the examples might include trimming outliers from a data set without discussing your reasons in the paper, using an inappropriate statistical technique in order to enhance the significance of your research, or failing to retain significant research data for a reasonable period. There are plenty more. I think what I should point out, though, is that at this time, questionable research practices vary in definition. Overall, the consensus among researchers in different disciplines is that the issue of QRPs tend to be more commonplace than we anticipate. It is important to note, however, that not all QRPs equal misconduct. Remember, it falls into that gray area, so as long as it represents scholarly practice and it's justifiable, you still fall into appropriate research conduct. Now, looking at QRPs in psychology, I wanted to highlight some of the findings. For instance, with John and colleagues, they examined the prevalence of QRPs in psychologists across universities in the US. They used the following list to the right of the slide and surveyed approximately 2,000 psychologists using a Bayesian truth serum, which it basically attempted to encourage more honesty and self-reported responses. What they found was that there was a high prevalence of QRPs among psychologists, that they actually admitted to having used at least one of them. It was also anticipated that the possible motive or reason why this was the case, or why they engaged in such practices, was due to publish or perish, which my colleague Joseph will be discussing in a little bit. As a follow-up to John and colleagues, the next study was about looking at the comparison among Italian psychologists, which is what Agnoli and colleagues looked into. In this case, they simply asked a yes or no question among Italian psychologists about whether they had engaged in those questionable research practices. Similar to the prior research findings, they did find evidence of engagement among QRPs in this sample. They also found lower incidences of some QRPs and higher incidences of others. Franco and colleagues was another study that I wanted to highlight that was really interesting because they were looking at specifically underreporting in psychological experiments. Again, this study also found that many did not report experimental conditions, and even more did not report all outcome variables. So I think what this speaks to is a larger issue that this is happening. But why? So looking at why does this happen? I'm only going to point out a couple for the sake of timing, but one of the things that the researchers mainly noted was the pressure or incentive to publish. Especially if you're thinking about a career in academia, or if you're already involved in one, the pressure to publish is quite high. It's a very real thing. Also, they also mentioned the demands and expectations of journals. Generally, there were comments about having placed too much credence on notorious researchers. There might be a bit more lax, for instance, with researchers who are well known on a topic because they suspect that they know what they're doing. But the reality is that we all make mistakes. There's also this preference for having perfect results. So that ends up putting a lot of pressure on the researcher. Some of the recommendations to address this issue include creating a climate of transparency, openness, and reproducibility. This was one of the major things that they noted that was something that we could improve on collectively among all disciplines. I think encouraging colleagues to be more open to share information, being okay with those imperfect results, and encouraging journals and editors to have a place where reproducibility can set the stage would really be helpful. Other recommendations included ongoing training in rigorous research methods and design. And again, I'm only going to mention one just for the sake of timing, but I think this would be especially helpful. I know for me as a student, if I'm not proactive and continually engaging in research, my skills can become a bit rusty. So this can be helpful for not only students, but also for the more seasoned researchers who can brush up on their skills. Now I'll go ahead and pass it on to my colleague, Joseph.
All right, thank you, Laura. I'm going to be talking about a toxic climate, the history of publish or perish. So, a brief history. Since perhaps 1928, publish or perish was used to describe the pressure that academics face. Publish or perish was the idea that you must publish academic literature. It is essential for the advancement as an academic. Your research really is the primary or sole way in which you're evaluated. Failure to publish may result in your dismissal as a professor. Today, this publish or perish pressure or coercion has really become a climate under which a vast majority of professors are evaluated. In today's climate, professors are evaluated based on the impact of their research, rather than the quality of research. This leads to professors being expected to produce research in high impact factor journals. Some research on economic and business professors reveal that professors feel the need to only publish in high quality peer-reviewed journals rather than book chapters, scholarly books, lower tier journals, and textbook publications. This climate is pervasive and profound. From the dean to administrators to even peers both in the university and outside the university, publish or perish has become a culture in American institutions. So, does this climate and evaluation method for professors actually increase or produce more research? Obviously, the publish or perish climate has its basis in traditional cognitive behavioral incentive punishment paradigms. One writer believes that this climate can increase the number of publications produced in Africa. Additionally, research shows that faculty in America produce more research before they are up for tenure compared to after they receive tenure. In addition, America and China, who also adopts the publish or perish paradigm, produce the highest research outputs, with America at #1 and China at #2 compared to other countries. So do researchers produce more research? Yes, but it does come with caveats. The publish or perish paradigm encourages researchers to produce more research rather than research more effectively or produce more quality research. In China, they enacted laws that change how academics are evaluated because the Chinese government felt that the number of articles China produced failed to tackle some of the practical issues China currently faces as a country. In addition, the need to produce more research contributes to increased research misconduct and publication misconduct, as Lara had said. Using China as an example, research misconduct and publication misconduct is prevalent in China. Ghostwriting in 2009 was a $150 million industry in China. Plagiarism and fabrications are prevalent, with one journal, Acta Crystallographica, having to retract 70 articles due to fabrications by Chinese scientists. Additionally, while research into the research quality is lacking, many editors of different fields bemoan the fact that the quality of publications has gone down, while the quantity of publications has gone up. So, do we need the publisher-perish paradigm to reduce more research? One study found that 91% of economics and business professors stated that they were intrinsically motivated to produce research and would want to produce research even if the publisher-perish climate was still there. In addition, research has found that while the number of publications typically increase before a professor received tenure, full professors consistently produce the most research in high-quality journals. As a result, I believe that the publisher-perish climate is detrimental to ethical research conduct, the university atmosphere, and the individual. Recent self-report research conducted on business and economics professors found that the publish-or-perish climate detracted from their publication performance. In addition, the publish-or-perish climate creates the pressure to publish, an anxiety-inducing feeling related to needing to publish, as well as publication burnout, in addition to research misconduct. In addition, with a combination of factors, the publisher-perish climate is detrimental to women and ethnic minorities. Research serves as the central qualifier for whether a professor deserves to be tenured. However, research has indicated and identified bias in publishing, which is seen internationally in different professions and within different spheres of psychology. Men are more likely to be published in higher-tier journals compared to women. It's particularly interesting in psychology because men are often identified as being underrepresented. This is despite the fact that women typically produce the same amount of research as men, and is not due to women devoting more time to teaching or raising children. While there is decidedly less research on ethnic minority, again, the same pattern emerges. There is a publishing bias. White professors were disproportionately represented in more impactful journal metrics and had more publications overall compared to other ethnicities. Overall, American and Latinx professors are underrepresented in impactful journals. Additionally, African Americans receive less funding for research, which is also paradoxically partially based on their impact factor. For social sciences, African American and Asian professors were underrepresented in publications proportional to the number of professors represented. In natural sciences, African American and Hispanic professors are underrepresented in publications. Asian Americans are overrepresented in natural science publications, so much so that they reduce the national number to about average proportional. So as a result, all this leads to most full professor positions being disproportionately held by white male professors, about 53%, while overall white professors constitute 80% of full professor positions here in America, while ethnic minority and female professors populate less prestigious positions, as you can see on this slide here. This issue has expanded to ethnic minority students. In addition, the publisher-perish climate is also detrimental to students. And as the expectation of publisher-perish is extended to students both in their programming and curriculum and evaluation. In addition, due to other factors, ethnic minority students are at a disadvantage, being less likely to publish and less likely to enter graduate school with research as an undergraduate. So, how can we improve the publisher-perish climate? How can we, research shows that writing workshops, writing coaches, and support groups can improve the number of publications produced. When professors were given extended workshops over a period of weeks, professors were more likely to devote more time to their research topics. These interventions can also increase the quality of publications and interventions, and it may make professors more receptive to changes requested by academic journal editors, as well as increasing their writing skill. However, more systematic change may result in a better, more sustainable system. Again, research conducted on business professors found that fostering a supportive environment at all levels for professors produced more research, rather than reminding them about the need to publish and creating a toxic climate. So, just some food for thought. It's just worth considering. Is the publisher-perish climate ideology worth keeping? Should we consider a new, fair culture? Should we evaluate professors on quality of research rather than on impact of research? If the publisher-perish culture is considered an essential motivator, how do we support our faculty and staff in this climate? How do we ensure they are practicing ethically in this climate as a university? How do we intervene and address the issues associated with the publisher-perish climate? And how do we limit this disproportional issue within publications? All right, and I think I'm going to go ahead and I'll turn it over now to Dr. Horn.
Thank you, Joseph. You have likely heard that education is key to success, and for this area, that has never been more appropriate. Our presenters for this symposium explored and discussed how institutional, universities, colleges, professors, and instructors have a crucial role in the early education of researchers. Avoiding scientific misconduct must be a key element in research courses and in research practices. Everyone that conducts research or has a part in research must fully understand that they have a role in protecting research integrity. Expectations and standards must be clearly explained, and consequences must be in place if there are violations. Our symposium presenters discussed foundational approaches to conducting research and shared innovative methods that can be utilized and incorporated into research courses and programs. New researchers, such as students, are likely to commit scientific misconduct through the lack of education and practice. Our presenters also discussed how institutions can provide research opportunities for students from which they can learn the practical applications of ethical research practices. While this is by no means an exhaustive list, we have included some helpful links that can be used by researchers and students. For research mentors and instructors, it is highly suggested that students be shown these resources, as well as others, and given the opportunity to ask questions regarding research. As noted earlier, education is key. Here are a few examples of research classroom strategies. Be sure students know the codes of ethics. These can also be very specific within a given discipline. Work with your institution's IRB office. They are a great ally for students and are a wealth of knowledge as students begin their research journey. Dr. Callis presented on ensuring students know about fabrication and falsification of data and who it hurts. Laura presented on questionable research practices. These lessons and examples need to be included in our research courses. Laura also underscored the importance of creating a climate of transparency, openness, and reproducibility. We must ensure that students know and understand plagiarism, including self-plagiarism, and the consequences of both. Dr. Callis touched on authorship and pointed out a great resource from APA, which includes agreements, scorecards, and contracts. This will help with that seemingly uncomfortable conversation about authorship, even between instructors and students. Joseph then presented on the publishing and publishing paradigm. This is a reality in most higher education institutions with varying degrees, but nonetheless, this is a conversation that should be introduced to students early, and ideally in a positive manner, which should lead them to a very productive research career for them. Some specific research class strategy examples include Deborah Smith's 2003 article in the APA Monitor on 5 principles of research ethics. This is still a very timely piece of information. Also from the University of Michigan, an information guide for students on academic integrity and plagiarism. Resources like these are easy and very important to include in research courses for students and would not be a bad review for current researchers. The topic of scientific misconduct and or questionable research practice can be, and usually is, a very uncomfortable topic, but a very important topic that must be front and center on any researcher's mind, whether as a student, new to research, or a seasoned researcher. This is how we can ensure quality research that our fields and consumers of research can be confident in. We thank you all for your time and attention and hope we have provided some valuable insight into these areas. But more importantly, we hope that we have sparked the beginning of an important conversation by conveying the importance of these areas needing to be shared and discussed. Now we open for questions and answers. Our following slides have our resources and references.